Talk, powered by Travis Perkins.
Hello, I'm Sally Wallace and welcome to today's episode. Joining me in the studio is Karl. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Karl Conway from KLC Builders Limited, based in South Manchester. Been building for 35 years.
And on the line today, we have Lee. We're joined by Lee. Lee, if you can introduce yourself, please.
I'm Lee Jackson. I'm WholeHouse Director and I work for Travis Perkins. I've been here for about 25 years now. Trained as an architect previous to that.
And I'm Sally Wallace, your host. I have been married to the trade now for 16 years. Yes, my husband is a builder and he has been so for 20 years. So my house, unfortunately, isn't finished as of yet. I say yet, okay? Planning permission has just gone through. So it's all very relevant with today's conversation because this is the Trade Talk podcast powered by Travis Perkins. It's a podcast for anybody who is in the trade or it takes a bit of an interest, wants to know more about the trade, has these niggling questions. That's exactly what we do here. We're here to help you, keep you up to date and answer any of the latest inquiries. And one of the biggest questions at the moment and things that are constantly changing is about building regulations. Now, we've got Lee on the line today. Now, Lee, I would like to say that you are not a building inspector. That's correct, isn't it?
I am certainly not a building inspector.
It's a bit like, are you a car parking attendant? It kind of has that reaction, doesn't it? It's the person that you don't want to come to your party. So, Lee, tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do with Travis Perkins and your line of work.
So, yeah, I've spent a huge amount of time at the group being involved around all the technical side of how buildings go together, looking at products. Most of the time spent supporting our customers. The last sort of 3 years I've been working on a big project where we've gone out and spoke to regional house builders and found out a whole lot of their challenges. And we've been trying to see if we can make that easier. How can we start to drive things that offer solutions around the building regs and new regulations and compliance that has to be achieved?
So you're telling me that you help your customers then. So Karl, for example, is a builder. Do you do extensions and new builds as well, don't you, Karl?
We do, yes.
This is where we try and get our branches to link with manufacturers because they're really good at that and have boots on the ground locally. But then the project I've been involved is around developing a tool for designing new build homes that only allow you to design something that's fully compliant. And that's called WholeHouse, hence my title, WholeHouse Director, to try and put some sort of meaning behind that. And that portal basically designs everything up front. So as you design your property visually on screen, it produces every piece of information you need to go and build that, knowing full well it's compliant at the time you produce the design.
Regulations are changing constantly. So are you having to change your kind of methods constantly as well? So how much of a challenge is that for what you do?
It's a huge challenge. To put some context into this, we've just recently had a change which was down as building regs in 2021. That came fully into compliance in June last year. And a lot of builders are only now sort of coming across a lot of the changes that comes. We know that we've got changes coming in 2025, which again is called the future home standards. And again, the consultation has just come out. I think that closes shortly. And then we should be working from there to see what effect that has on buildings. And over the last sort of really 10 years, everything's become, we're trying to break down the silos. It's so interlinked between, if you change to make the building warmer, then it has an impact on ventilation. And some of the listeners have probably heard it referred to as FLOSS, because part F, L, O, and S all changed in the regulations this time round. And that's basically the ventilation strategy for the building, the heat loss through the building. O is a new part of the regulations, which is all around overheating, which has been needed within the regulations for a little while now. And S is around the infrastructure for EV charging and electric vehicles, and to make sure that new homes are fit for that drive as we move forward.
This doesn't just affect new builds, this is also for extensions as well, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yeah, some of the stuff doesn't quite come in as heavy into extensions. But what it has started to really highlight is that building, historically, our industry has been about rule of thumb, slide rules. And well, we do this, we slap a bit more insulation in and it all works lovely. When you go back to old buildings, the U value in the wall was 2. It's now, we're looking at numbers like 0.18. Some people are trying to drive it even lower than that. So it's becoming about building physics now. So every time you make a change, the one thing that you can guarantee is there will be a consequence somewhere else. And it's understanding this mix of how it all comes together to make sure the building works harmoniously. And with things like the retrofit that's happening, we need to make sure the opportunity with extensions is to try and make the rest of the building perform better by actually overcompensating potentially on the extension as well.
So, Karl, this is something that will affect you really, because you're a hands-on builder. You're still on the tools, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, have you experienced any of these changes that Lee's mentioned already, with regards to your work or up-and-coming projects that you've got on at the moment?
Yeah, we've got a project with a new build at the moment, which is an end terrace, and I was just mentioning before that we've got no windows at the side of the building, and we've got windows and doors at the front and the back, and these houses were built with plenty of glass in there at the time. And now obviously we're keeping up with the new regulations. You go to a SAP, you get a SAP report, and what we found out is the lad's just come back and he said, well, we can move this around, but what we suggest you to do is to take some of the glass and some of the area, which is the main patio doors from the back of the house, and put them to the side of the house, and I presume that's with all the heat situations. So you can move it around. Lee will know a lot more than me on that side of it, but there is a lot more regulations to use. I mean, on general extensions, you've got your average cavity, which is you've got your two walls and your gap in between. That's your cavity, which has your insulation in. They've gone now to a 6-inch cavity fill rather than a 4-inch cavity. And speaking to building inspectors recently, I'm saying, is there still builders that are keeping with the old regs and not keeping up with it?
Yeah.
And he's saying, yeah. And I'm going, well, how do you go against that? Because obviously when you get to the damp proof stage and they're building the cavity, they've built the building when you next come back. So the cavity's been put in at 4-inch and not 6. And he said, well, what we have to do then is we have to do it on the inside. So in other words, you're still getting the insulation values, but what you're going to do is you're going to put your plasterboard up, but then the plasterboard might have, say, 50 mil or however insulation it is to coincide with what you've not put in on the inside of the cavity. You've then put it to the inside of the wall. I mean, there's other buildings that, like, say you can't use the cavity and they want it insulated, and they are literally putting the insulation on the outside of the wall, which then is like ending up being a rendered house unless you get special bricks to make it look like it's that same style and existing look.
So you just mentioned something then called SAP. So that's SAP compliance. What is that something that you can elaborate on a bit more, Lee? Do you tell us what SAP is?
Basically, it sits behind what drives your EPC on a property, and it's the full version of that's used across the country. And it's designed to give you a target that you have to hit for both the fabric efficiency of the building as well as energy use to reduce the CO2 that's being used within that property. And all new buildings have to hit that target. And through that, it's a really powerful tool. The challenge the industry has is it's not a design tool, it's a compliance tool. So it's there to check that what you've already designed works. And one of the biggest issues with it is you can pretty much always make it comply. So you just keep ticking boxes and add in different things. And this is where I think building regs sometimes get a bit of a bad name. We have a change and everyone goes, well, it's going to cost me loads more money to go and do my building. I'm going to have to put more insulation in. I'm going to have to put PV on the roof. I may have to move away from a gas boiler and put an air source heat pump or some other new renewable energy heat source within the property. And actually, if you spin it on its head, what it's actually enabled us is to turn it into a building into more of a recipe. And there's no fixed answers in any part. You just mentioned, Karl, about the fact that the cavities are moving to 6 inches or 150 mil. Actually, they don't need to. You can still make buildings comply with 100 mil cavity. And this is one of certainly my frustrations in the industry at the moment is historically we've just said, add more insulation, make the walls bigger. When you actually look at a property, if you certainly you say you're talking about an end terrace, if you was to take the mid terrace that may be next to that property, the area of brickwork for the cavity wall is probably about 14% of the overall insulative fabric of the building. And what you're trying to do is change everything from using that 14%. Now, in the walls, if you make that wider, you have to have bigger lintels, bigger wall ties, you take up more floor area space, and you're only affecting 14% of the wall. Now, actually, your glazing has an equally bigger area. Your ground floor and ceiling area is even bigger. So actually, they're the areas that you want to start to look at to say, actually, how do I make this building work better as a whole? And a lot of the time, it's actually what's known as psi values, which are the junctions where windows meet the wall, where the wall meets the floor, all these little areas where it's very difficult to get loads of insulation in. And the best way I can describe how that works is if you put a really big coat on and leave it unzipped, you'll probably be fairly warm. If you put a smaller jacket on and zip it up and make sure it's tight around your cuffs and around your neck, then you'll be equally as warm with something that's nowhere near as big. And actually, that's what we're trying to achieve with buildings, is find this balance between insulating well, but more importantly, insulating in where it really matters, and trying to get this harmonious jacket, for want of a better word, to cover the property. That works really, really well. And that's what SAP has the ability with a really good SAP assessor and consultant that knows how to use that, but how to use it to suit how you work, rather than just saying, can you go and make this comply? And somebody says, yep, I can make it comply. I want it on my desk and off my desk as quick as possible. And I'm just going to tick as many boxes until the last wall goes green. And once it goes green, I'm going to say, yep, Karl, you need to do this, this, and this, and it will comply.
So you just mentioned then, Lee, that you don't have to be 6 inches of insulation. You could still do it with 4 and it would still comply. But what if, say, for example, Karl just said then he's met a building inspector who said it has to be 6, but you have to do additional work to it. What happens if you get the building inspector that says it has to be 6?
That was if they've already built a wall, you put it on the inside.
So if it's 4 or 6, it still complies?
Yeah, there's a more of a rigid board, is that right, that you can use, and that 100mm cavity that will still do the same U value? Yes,
but it's not just about the U value. The backstop has changed in the last set of regulations, but it's still, you can still do a 300mm wall with a dry therm, 32 insulation, flexible insulation in it. Will still work, but what you have to do is then add it somewhere else. It's a bit like a cake mix. You can specify one mix of cake and it will work, but actually there's thousands of other mixes that will also give you a nice dessert that you can eat, and it's finding the right one that suits you and the building type. And one of the big things that sort of come to light in the work that I've been doing with WholeHouse is, I think a lot of this is understanding that within buildings, normally the design freeze is the day we hand the keys to the customer. So what I mean by that is we get a design that shows what the building's going to look like. We then start to produce, we get a set of technical drawings produced, and we go and build and start building. On average, that's about 20% of the technical information needed to build a house. The other 80% is either done during the build, or actually is done by the person installing it at one-to-one scale and doing it on the job. Every property will be slightly different depending on the weather, the day of the week, and the installer. Where actually, if all of that work is done up front, and I know this takes time in advance, that means you can start to play with more things because you're not trying to always make something fit something that's already been done. So actually, on paper, to change the cavity from 150mm to 100mm isn't very hard. If you've already made a decision on site, you're stuck with that decision, and then you have to move forward from that, and you're always sort of fighting what the trade before or the person before has actually done.
Yeah, the building inspectors are there to help you as well, aren't they, really? A lot of people think that as a name as a building inspector, they're scared of it or there's going to be problems, but they're not. They are trying to say, okay, that's been done, but how can we work around it and move on? So they are there to help you. Yeah, there's plenty of things.
Absolutely.
So tell us about stair regulations, because I believe that they are destined to change in the near future as well, and that can also affect the cake mix, as you say it too. So I'm using your words, Lee.
Yeah, I think this is it. We've been very used to over the years to seeing things like insulate. We know properties are going to be more and more insulated, and I think we've sort of come used to how we're going to address that. One of the changes that in consultation this year is to look at the stairs and whether we fundamentally change how we design them. Now, that on paper, you hear that and you go, okay, is that going to make much of a difference? But if they change the going from 220 mil to, say, 250 mil, that changes the pitch, but more importantly, changes the size of the opening that you need for the stairs. So when you start to look at a relatively small, say, 2-3 bed terraced unit, that staircase, if you make it longer, normally has a bedroom front and back. That can fundamentally change the design of that property. It may make the property up to 0.5 metre longer. Now, that's a massive change that can have some really big impacts. And it's pretty much the same as what we've just seen with Part O and overheating and window sizes. I've spent a chunk of certainly the end of 2023 talking to builders that have spent 18 months getting planning permission for a property with lovely large windows because that's what the client wants and customers want, to suddenly find that they now can't make that comply because there's too big a glass area, similar to what Karl was talking about with the large patio doors on the rear of a property. Now, all of this stuff is so interlinked these days, and one small change in isolation, you look at it, well, actually, okay, if stairs become a little bit bigger, does it make much of a difference? But can fundamentally change a whole plan of a property overnight. And with the planning system, if you've spent a long time to just achieve planning permission, you need to be building. We want to be getting that now up on built, sold, and moving on to the next project, especially if it's taken a long time. And all of this awareness is these things happen, and I'm really fortunate. I sit on loads of committees, I get to hear what's happening and talk to a lot from builders, from the top 10 house builders down to somebody building one house a year, right the way through to those that are building extensions. You put all that together and you go, how do you find your way through that as a minefield? And you end up relying on hopefully a team of consultants and experts. And Travis Perkins has just added a section to its website with all of the building regs on there to try and make that a little bit easier, with some explanations on there of what each one is. But it's still down to finding that your own trusted team of consultants that help you through that. You can't rely on just rule of thumb anymore. And even your building inspector, they have a huge amount of knowledge, but actually it's about driving a commercial build within this. And actually, the more people you involve in it, it's one of these ones where if you spend a little bit more money up front, it can save you a fortune in the long term of continually making changes. And to a degree, by the time it gets to the building inspector, you're in a place where they're saying it doesn't comply and you're now trying to make it comply, rather than sometimes it just a simple design change by tweaking the orientation of the property right at the very beginning had no cost implication, but could have saved loads through the build later on.
That's interesting what you said there, Lee. And you said that, you're fortunate enough to be in a position where you can find out information firsthand. And so for somebody like, in Karl's position, who is on the tools, he's on site. Karl, how do you stay up to date with the changes?
Well, again, it's the knowledge and getting to know, like it's just said, the more information you get, the more things
where do you get it from? That's what, so people, right, who would be listening to this at the moment and are really conscious about constant changes in building regulations, where are you getting your information from? Do you work with consultants as well?
Architects, drawing, structural engineers, but now Travis Perkins, I'll be going on their site and seeing what that's about. So I'll find out that address.
You're a very helpful guy, Lee.
Yes, I'm definitely onto that one. Now, I spoke to a building inspector recently, and as I say, as much as they are there to help and get everything right and put the right regulations in, they can't exactly help you as much as they used to now, because what's happening is say you come across a problem and there's a piece of steel in the way and no one knew because the plaster was on there, and now what you've got to do is you've got to go and get the right information. You've got to get either structural engineers reports, whether or not the architects gets involved, but mainly structural engineers. And then once they put it on paper, then you can say to the building inspector, this is what we're doing. You know, maybe a long time ago, you could say to a building inspector, what if we do this and what if we do that? Yeah, that sounds right. You go ahead and do it. But now it's classed as if they do agree to a change on the job, or the builder does the change on the job, what they're saying is you're not designers, so you can't really give that information and you can't do it. So they're there to help you, but they're not there to tell you how it is unless it's put down in black and white and paper, so it covers everyone's.
Well, their regulations have probably changed, haven't they?
Yeah.
Within their job role, and so I can imagine with their changes have come the changes that they have to implement to the builder as well.
There's a lot more changes that's gone on and a lot more regulations.
A lot of red tape at the moment. It sounds like there's more and more of it that's being enforced.
He told me a little example the other day. He said it's like some customers on buildings that need doing up, they might find that they've got like some kind of draft in the room or something, and as an example, the sealing up air bricks, or they might have a building that's gone on and they've blocked one air brick, but to the customer it's nothing, but that can actually cause a lot of dry rot and a lot of problems by just taking that circulation off the building. So, you know, I've been round to houses and they're saying, I've got white mould or something, and I'm no expert on mould, but I do know that a lot of ventilation and a lot of flow, and when I look at the air bricks, they've sealed them all up. And it's simple as it's just undoing. I mean, the new regulations now on windows, I presume that hopefully it's not changed and I'm not saying the wrong thing, but it's all trickle vents in each window. Now, I was a stickler for that. Every window that I fit, I always wanted a new air vent in it. But now I think trickle vents are a must to put in.
Well, overheating is a word that's been coming up quite a bit in this episode as well. And that seems to be a bit of a concern. And Lee, I know that you've mentioned that overheating is obviously something that needs to be considered to be compliant. So is there any advice that you can give anybody about overheating?
Yes, and as Karl sort of just said, really, a lot of this comes down to we have to start to move away from this rule of thumb sort of stance that we've always had within buildings. It is building physics, and we need to know what we're going to build and what the consequential changes are right from the very start. And for me, it's about having that right design team early on before we start on site. And overheating, there's a couple of ways in which it can be resolved, or you prove whether it complies or not. There's what's known as the simplified route, which is a set of rules which, without doing it injustice, drives smaller windows, because the smaller window, the less heat that can be gained. But there's also a process called a TM59 calculation that can be carried out. It's a complex calculation and relatively costly, but actually it's one that will help you understand the whole building and how it works. And then working that with SAP can get you to a place where you can hopefully end up with a building that's designed the way that you want it, but more importantly, performs the way you expect it to perform. And I think that's the real big piece with this.
Is the overheating as well due to the fact that the climate is getting warmer in the UK? So is this also affecting regulations?
Absolutely. Most of our energy bills are based around heating. And actually, we're driving towards it's moving towards hot water now because buildings are becoming more efficient. But B, what we don't want to do is start to end up having summer cooling as our bigger energy bills. Because from an environmental side, sticking air conditioning in all of our buildings is not the best environmental story. So it's about looking to the future and making sure the buildings will perform both now and be fit for the future as well.
Lee, can I just ask, are they using more on like rainwater, where they're kind of using that, say, maybe to flush your system or use as spare water from the roof? Is that a possible? I did hear something, but I don't know if they're moving on forward with that, recycling the water that drops out of the sky.
It's something that was used heavily, certainly around the Code for Sustainable Homes a few years ago. But actually, the one that's on that side of reusing energy, one that's coming in is wastewater heat recovery, where things like when you have a shower, there's a pipe that now drops down next to the soil and vent stack, and actually the wastewater going down warms the cold water that runs up the outside of that pipe to warm it up, so you use less of your hot water that you've already paid to heat. So you have warm and hot water rather than cold and hot water to get you the desired temperature. So things like that are really coming and are now part of the regulations, and we'll see even more of that come into play in 2025 with future home standards. But like I say, that all of these things are there. So grey water, for flushing toilets. There's really good systems out there, tend not to be used as much, and certainly don't because give you some points in SAP, but not a huge amount. Because they're all there, and we see customers that are literally using all of this technology to reduce bills, and more importantly, to have a really powerful impact on the energy they use across every part of the building.
See, Sally, now you can have your B-day. That's lovely and warm, you see.
Do I look like I have a B-day?
Your huge hot tub in your swimming pool in your back garden with air.
I must admit, I do want an ice bath, but that's clearly a whole other episode altogether, isn't it? Listen, Lee, thank you so much for your time today. It's been very, very informative. In fact, you're a hive of information. So where can people go and find more about the work that you do that can help them if they're in the trade and they want more information about regulations and so on and so forth? And also the work that you've worked for 25 years in this sector. So, you're very knowledgeable. Is there a website that people can be driven towards?
Yeah, there's a few things. There's Travis Perkins on their actual website. There's information there about all of the building regulations. Also, if you Google WholeHouse, which is wholehouse.uk, that will also give you access. You can log on there, and if you look at new build designs, it's worth a look. It starts from 5 separate floor plans, and from that you can get to 500 million different house designs. And as you go through those designs, they're fully compliant. I'd also sort of recommend, if you're really struggling, look at places like the HBF website, the FMB, any of these federations that are there for builders to actually have a huge amount of resource around what they can offer and the information that's out there. There's a lot of stuff out there. And do you know what? Contact your local branch. They have really good relationships with manufacturers. Each manufacturer has a huge amount of information about how their products and what's happening with the new regulations and how it can be used. And actually, that's a free resource that's open to all of our customers. So I would really support the use of that as well.
Lee, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. As well, Karl, thanks for joining us on today's episode. Lee. Please make sure that you do subscribe to the Trade Talk podcast, because as soon as we do a new episode, it means that you get to listen to it first. Thank you so much for stopping by today, and I hope to see you again very soon.
Trade Talk, powered by Travis Perkins.